into a tiny little box. To say that you understand God isn't a way to say that you are bigger than God. That's their version of Christian humility. I'm a great son, by the way. Good, you got the joke there. Yeah, they're 100% sure that there's a God, and that's already inauthentic, and it goes against the whole concept of faith. But number two, you've heard this from me before. They have not made a leap of faith. Because a leap of faith is to commit yourself completely to something that you can't completely understand, and you don't have any guarantees that you are right. When I say my parents have guarantees, anyone know what I'm saying? They are 100% sure that God is giving them golden tickets. They are 100% certain that God has already authorized golden tickets for them. Do I need to spell out the metaphor? We're going to heaven. I'm like, well, then it's not faith. Because, and I'm going to paraphrase Kierkegaard, doubt is a correlate to the believer's faith. Doubt is a correlate to the believer's faith. If you have zero doubts about it, then it's no longer faith. As a matter of fact, give me 30 seconds. As a matter of fact, it's a formula. You've just turned God into an object. You've just turned your relationship with God into an object. As a matter of fact, it's not even a relationship. It's a transaction. Do you get the difference? You call it a relationship, but it's not a relationship. A relationship is something that you can be hurt by. It is something that you commit to without any guarantees. It is a give and take. They've objectified God. They've objectified God. That's a failure to understand their place in the grand scheme of things, according to the great theologians. But then again, that's not how their particular brand of prosperity Protestantism works. In other words, they're in it for the what? They're in it for the stuff. And they're cool about them not getting their stuff here. Although by American standards, they're pretty what? They're pretty well off by American standards. And global standards at that. They weren't always. But yeah, they think they're going to get the awesomest rewards. Just like Jesus' screw-up apostles. Oh boy, was that fun. You'll understand my blasphemy in a minute. There's a passage in the Gospels. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they're having trouble staying awake, which is already bad news. But there's two, I forget which of the two apostles they were, but they were asking God about, or Jesus about the, well, Jesus is God according to Christianity, but they were asking Jesus about the kingdom of heaven. And they were asking where they were going to what? Where am I going to sit? I could only imagine Jesus' face at this point. He says, they've been listening to me for how long and they still don't get it? The kingdom of heaven is not a hierarchy. It will not be a place where there is a pecking order. Tell me I'm your favorite. Tell me I'm your favorite. They completely missed the point. And unfortunately, I think there's plenty of Christians who completely miss the point. I mean, they miss the point. Where you're going to sit in heaven is not spiritual rewards. That's a pecking order. That's like, do I get to sit next to the president of the college and get my picture taken with him? Please, Dr. Ski, take a picture with me for the newsletter. Those are not spiritual fruits. You've seen the newsletter, right? You know what I'm talking about. Oh, Mr. Peters, I'm having way too much fun here. Yeah.
Okay, so my big question is this. Let's say you have a somewhat unreasonable goal, but you have a formula to approach it. You know that if you continuously fail, you will eventually meet that goal. You don't have a guarantee per se, but you're pretty damn sure it'll work out. Does that fit within his mold of taking the leap of faith, or does that fall in the formula category?
I may answer your question indirectly. You have to first keep in mind this. 3? Good. I thought I had less time than that. You have to keep in mind that these things that you are choosing to define yourself by, you want to first make sure that these are the things that you have consciously chosen to give your life meaning. And by the way, you should also appreciate that perhaps achieving those goals isn't where you will find meaning anyway. As a matter of fact, the authentic person, this is going to sound cliche after I say it, I know it will. But the person who really appreciates Kierkegaardian meaning would recognize that it ought not to be about getting to some kind of finish line. By the way, life can potentially be filled with all kinds of finish lines. And you know what happens whenever you cross one finish line. Sometimes you say, well, what the hell do I do next? In other words, you need to what? You need to find some other finite finish line. And another finite finish line. Do you guys watch TV? It's sort of like that episode of Futurama, where the great bumbling scientist, Dr. Farnsworth, he is always wanting to solve scientific and technological problems. There's one episode where he it's one of these existential themes things. He ends up solving the life universe and everything. And instead of being all excited about it, he's what? He's like, what am I going to do? Solving problems, what was the meaning of my life? In other words, the engagement in the projects wasn't so much, I should say, the goal, even though his eye was always on the goal of solving this, that, and the other thing, he found his meaning not just in solving the problem, but in what? In the act of being itself. In other words, finding meaning in the things that you are, in fact, doing, not just the so-called what? Not just in the so-called goal.
This sounds a hell of a lot like Aristotle in some ways.
Well, in a way, it should. And here's why. Finding meaning in life is not about crossing a finish line. And by the way, crossing the finish line means you're dead. Just like Aristotle, becoming a self worth calling a self is actually something like an ongoing process. And by the way, you shouldn't want it to be over. Because if you want it to be over, that means one of two things, or maybe more. That life beat you. And I'm talking like Camus here. Philosophical suicide. In other words, saying life is not worth living, I wish I had never been born. Philosophical suicide of that sort is basically saying that life has kicked your ass. It is basically saying you don't have the courage to stand up any longer. This is why Camus says, even if life has no meaning, you should still, like Friedrich Nietzsche, be willing to say, yes. Yes, I will. Even if, just like with Sisyphus, it's out of scorn. If you haven't read The Myth of Sisyphus, you should. It's very funny. Not belly laugh funny, but it's nonetheless humorous if you give it a chance. One of the things he says is that Sisyphus' life is a life of meaningless toil. But one of the driving forces for him is scorn.
47.
Thanks. One of his, I guess I'll say my last words. Yeah, that didn't sound good. Yeah, my last words. But yeah, one of his driving forces is scorn. Take a guess who he's scornful of. Sisyphus. The gods who put him there. He is scornful of the hateful, irrational gods who put him here. And by the way, that's why for some of us, and I'll go on record saying this, and I tell my wife this all the time, even as a middle-aged man. I say, I'm not sure if I'm an atheist or if I just think God's a you-know-what. I've never been sure about that. Because when you grow up ostensibly Christian, it's hard to entirely throw those beliefs away, no matter how much what. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm an atheist or if I just hate God. Because he was cruel enough to allow me to be born and to have to suffer so much. Even though my suffering is not what in the grand scheme of things. I'm not one of the starving children in Biafra. I'm obviously not one of the starving children in Biafra. But I am, nonetheless, a person who suffers from existential crises. Because you know how it is? And Camus says this in the myth of Sisyphus. Your troubles will always find you. You know, every time you solve one trouble, some other trouble comes along. In other words, this is kind of that life, birth, or was it birth, school, work, death scenario. But the point is to try to embrace it even for what? Even for its absurdity. Even for its toils. Even for the fact that the human condition is absurd. Even if there is no meaning in the universe. You should say, darn it, I don't care if the universe has no meaning. I will boldly create my own meaning. And if nobody else appreciates what I call meaningful, who cares? Because if you say that, you're letting other people define you anyway. Be willing to give them half the peace sign. That was a good way to end.